Namaskar. Valmiki Ramayana in English. Begin with the pranam mantra. Om Ramaya Ramachandraya Ramabhadraya Vedase Raghunathaya Nathaya Sitaya Pate Nama. In the previous, that is the first talk, we had a look at a general overview of Ramayana and how it is related to the Indian spiritual traditions. And we also mentioned in passing how Valmiki got down to writing this great work. Now, slowly we will get into the main book, not the main story yet. But one thing that I would like to inform you that when it comes to a literary work, any literary work, say, be it Shakespeare in English, be it Rabindranath Tagore in Bengali, Premchand, etc. in Hindi, how do you judge the success of a literary work? See, one simple test is how many books it sells. But as you know that cannot be the real test of success, because in most cases is a pulp of fictions. For example, when we were young, I used to hear books from James Headley Chase and all those people. They used to sell like anything. And now that I know some publishers, they also tell that certain books that have spices, they sell a lot. Then there is a very interesting book, uh, the James Bond series by Ian Fleming. It also had good success. So you find that there are books that sell well, and there are books that get translated, and then there are books that get adapted. For example, there was one book, this Slumdog Millionaire, somebody had written, and somebody made a movie. I have neither read the book, nor seen the movie, nor interested in it, because any book that condemns India, any book, somehow it catches the eyes of the Western world, and they love reading those things and making a fad out of it. But a truly creative work that succeeded was, say, Life of Pi. As the luck would have, I have read the book, I have also seen the movie. Of course, movie is nowhere near the book. Book is really great. Then we have Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. So, adaptations. If you ask me, this is my view, that the success of a book can only be judged by the number of adaptations it invites. Even number of translations will do, because translations are also adaptation, but adaptations are pretty different from translations. That way, Valmiki Ramayana cannot have any match. I have dabbled a bit in the world literature of different kind, including spiritual books. Say, for example, let's take the most popular sacred book of India, Gita. Gita has many translations, many commentaries have been written. No doubt, Gita is the spiritual heartbeat of India. But when it comes to adaptations, there are very few books which are an adaptation of Gita. But when it comes to Valmiki Ramayana, last time I had searched, that was maybe 15, 20 years ago, there are already around 6 different translations of Valmiki Ramayana in English. But when it comes to languages and adaptations, practically every region and every language in the Indian subcontinent has its own version. It's massive. What an influence. Personally, I feel charged up whenever I have to deliver talks based on Valmiki Ramayana. So, and more interestingly, you'll find this Ram Leela being organized practically throughout North India, particularly in the Hindi belt, and where you have huge adaptations. They improvise and they add dialogues, etc. So it's What an influence. So now we slowly get into the background of the book. Normally, you may think that whatever is there, the available print that we have in whatever language, that is by Valmiki. No, it's not. The introductory chapters have been written by his disciples, and very difficult to say who was that disciple, or it may have been after hundreds of years that somebody organized the whole thing well and organized it. As we proceed, we will see more of it. So, for example, in the beginning, in the first chapter itself, and I will be mentioning this is Balakand. The book is in 6 sections. 7th section is a clear interpolation, and we won't even touch that. So the 6 sections are organized in various chapters. The last verse of the first chapter is very interesting, which says, Patan Dujo Vag Rishi. It talks about 4 Varnas, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and says that people belonging to different Varna, if they study this book, then they get the result depending on their Varna. So, Brahmin, he becomes scholarly, Kshatriya, he becomes a great king, and a Vaishya, they earn wealth, and a Shudra earns huge respect. It's a very interesting thing that very clearly shows that this introduction is by someone else, because Valmiki nowhere mentions these things. We had mentioned how Valmiki had asked the sage Narada. No background story of Valmiki is available in Valmiki Ramayana, although later it was the story was created in the form that there was a Brahmin, Ratnakar, who fell in bad company and he became a robber. And then, very famously, he once caught hold of the great sages, wanted to rob them. And then Narada asked that go and check who will take part of your sin. It's a long story. So Ratnakar went back and asked, and family was surprised that he indulged in such things. And that gave him the sense that whatever he was doing was not proper. And Narada gave him the mantra Ram. And it says that Ratnakar was so full of vice that he could not even repeat Ram. Kept on saying Mara, Mara. But if you keep on chanting Mara, Mara repeatedly, it becomes Ram, Ram, Ram. This story actually comes in Adhyatma Ramayana, but has become so popular, so famous that, like, for example, I myself, I grew up on this story. And this has become as if the true story of Valmiki. I just mentioned it in passing. And then later, Ratnakar became a great sage Valmiki, because when Narada asked him to perform tapasya, contemplate on one topic, so he was so much lost in that contemplation that he lost sense of time, etc. And slowly white ants created their ant hills. And after many years, when Narada came and called out his name, slowly he opened his eyes and came out. Actually, this story comes in Mahabharata for a different sage named Chavan. They were, it's known as Kathakar, the storytellers. And they used to take the fascinating elements of one story and superimpose it on the second. So it was a very normal practice. Now, there also, same thing happens later that Valmiki gets inspired by Narada and gets down to writing the story of Sri Rama. Now, here, in Valmiki Ramayana, the second chapter, verse number 2, says that once Narada told him about Sri Rama, he went back to his divine world. Narada is the great sage who is also a great devotee of Lord Vishnu. And due to a curse, he cannot have a home. Is Niketa, one who doesn't have a home. So he doesn't stay anywhere, he doesn't care. He has his divine musical instrument, Veena, on which he keeps on playing Harinam, name of the Lord, and inspires people. And wherever he goes, he tries to uplift people. In later times, thousands of stories of Lord Vishnu and Narada were created by different, in localities and regions, and they keep floating and keep inspiring people of various reasons. So Narad here is described as belonging to the lok of the devas. Lok means abode. Now, as the Ila could have immediately after that, now that's not possible because here it says that after an hour or two. Now that's not possible because when you go to converse with somebody, it's later in the morning or at daytime. But here is described that Valmiki was going for a bath with his disciples. Now this itself brings a big question mark on Valmiki being Ratnakar. What happens? People don't forget you easily. If you were a robber and if you're a well-known robber, you may become an enlightened person. It's not possible for you to learn a language. Best example is Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna is God himself. He knew only Bengali, smattering of Hindi, and just a few drops of, in the forms of a few words in English. And one of the words he knew was thank you, and there was damn. Damn. God knows where he picked up this word damn. Now, Swamiji, he knew some of the languages, but initially he didn't know Sanskrit. Initially. And later on, we find that he wanted to learn French and all. So it's not easy to master a language simply because you are spiritually great. No, it's not possible. In stories, you can have, but in reality, no. Second thing is, since people know what kind of person you were, it's not easy for you to get admirers. After you are passing away, you may have admirers, but in your lifetime, it's very difficult to get disciples. Very difficult. So here it comes that Valmiki, the great sage, he went to Tamasa River. Those of you who have access to Indian map, if you look at Prayagraj area and look a little south to Prayagraj, you'll find that there's a small rivulet, Tamasa. And Tamasa is a very small river. And well, as far as our sage Valmiki is concerned, the river was enough for him. And Bharadwaj is a very famous sage. We'll meet him later too. In fact, one whole section of the Vedas, there are 10 books in the Rig Veda. One whole book is dedicated to Bharadwaj family. Now, Sage Bharadwaj, being a disciple of Valmiki means that Valmiki was a highly respected sage because a A great personality like Bharadwaj will not become disciple of anyone. Valmiki says, now these are narrations because it very clearly says Valmiki says like this, Valmiki says like that. So it cannot be Valmiki himself. It was written by someone else, someone who is describing it. So he told Bharadwaj that, look, what is so clean here? Just like the mind of a saint. Let's take bath here. So he was changing his clothes to take bath. And he was kind of about to enter the river when he watched a pair of Krauncha birds. It's a small bird. It must have been mating season because they were letting out sounds of endearment, loving sounds. They exchanged that kind of words, or maybe some other season. Now, if you try to imagine India of that period, well, I think it must be 5,000, 6,000 years ago. Only the historians can say for sure when exactly Valmiki Ramayana was composed. I personally believe that it must have been at least 4,000 years ago, 4 to 5,000. I cannot vouch for it, but my instinct says. Population was not much. Forests were numerous. Even when I was a young boy, say 50 years ago, there were large, large tracts of India were covered by forest. Now, of course, they are gone. So, birds and beasts, along with their hunters, they were in plentiful. So, there was a person of the caste Nishad. Nishad, they did different kinds of work. Later, we will meet them who were they used to, they, they were into rowing boats. They were also into hunting. Odd job. Very difficult to say if they were purely tribal people. Slightly difficult to say because we cannot say for sure. The general term, the general expression was nishad. So one of these hunters, he shot an arrow and one of the pair fell down and the other who survived kept on screeching in pain. In earlier times, people used to be great marksmen. If the way now we have people handling their guns, those people were very good at handling their arrows and bows. The bird had fallen down. Blood was oozing out. And the other one was screeching like mad. Here you have to imagine a scene. Think of a huge area. Trees and forests are there, river is there. A river with clean water is flowing. This is a sage whose mind has become completely pure. His mind is fully inclusive. He's taking in the scene forest, river, the birds, the environment. Such great minds have a tendency to get identified with all this. So Valmiki was naturally totally identified And there comes the crash. One of the birds, one of the pair, falls down, shot, dying. The way we would probably cry out, the way we will probably scream if we see someone dear to us getting shot accidentally or meeting with an accident. You are walking down the road, totally engaged in some kind of conversation, and suddenly there is an accident. God forbid that it ever happens with you. What happens is scream comes out. And that exactly is what happened with Valmiki. But it was not an ordinary scream. His words came out in the form of poetry. There was this grief, there was this pain. It as if pierced the creative power of Valmiki, the power that had built inside him. Imagine green coconut. You pierce it, and its water flows out. So for creativity first, you need to have that build-up. If that build-up is not there, there is no possibility that you can ever be creative. And then it requires an external piercing. Or, well, you can think of an oyster. If you think of the entire human population, which must be around 7 billion, 8 billion, something like that. Imagine all of them as oysters, swimming and floating in the ocean. Sometimes some sand particle enters an oyster. And to protect itself from the irritation, the oyster releases its secretions, which results in pearls of various kinds, some ordinary, some precious. Well, creativity is like that. You have to have that juice within you. Some irritant has to enter. Or think of a green coconut that gets pierced. Water oozes out. So I have heard of some universities that delivers talks that have courses on creative writing. Now, how can you teach creative writing? We had one monk I found, he was delivering talk on creative writing. In his life, he has not written one single page. He was delivering talk on creative writing. First, you have to have within you. Then there has to be piercing. And usually that piercing comes through some kind of pain. Depending on how huge the buildup is and how huge is the pain, that means how huge is the piercing. The flow, the outflow can be only that good. Dear listeners, God forbid that you ever wish to be a creative person. You just cannot imagine the grind that you have to undergo. The little that we get is from these introductory words about Valmiki. We do not know of a Vyasa. Of course, see, there's a huge difference because Vyasa is credited with organizing the Vedas, which was nothing great, and writing Mahabharata, which is like a compendium. He was more of an organizer. Vyas was more of an organizer, and then in Puran also he organized the stories. So Vyas was more of an organizer with poetic talents. Valmiki was original, truly creative. Kalidas was truly creative. So Vyas was essentially a sage who was really brilliant at organizing. Yagyavalkya was like that. Yagyavalkya also was a great organizer. So you have translators, you have organizers, and you have the creative ones. You will be surprised to know that Mahabharata has not been adopted, but the stories of Mahabharata are very popular and they get adopted. So Mahabharata is more like a compendium of Indian history. But Valmiki's Ramayana is a work of creative genius. My request to all of you is please listen to this series of talks. This is just massive. Every Indian should listen to these Valmiki Ramayana talks. And every Indian should encourage the foreign nationals to listen to these talks, to know about Valmiki Ramayana, because this portrays the true Indian values. As we mentioned, as we described in the previous talk, it gives you inspiration for your own conflict situations. And then he blurted out, Ma Nishad Pratishtham Tvam Agama Shaswati Sama. Yat Kaunch Mithunad Ekam Avadi Kama Mohitam. O Nishad, O hunter, you won't get peace. You won't get peace in your future births. The expression is Shaswati Sama. Sama is used for years. Shaswati is eternity, you can say. For killing a bird that was engaged in love making. And those of you might have read Kratu, my book, you'll find this story dramatized in a different way. This story is so fascinating, the story of Krauncha, Mithun, Vad, twin Kraunch. The poor hunter. Well, that's their job. That's how they live. He also had a family to look after. How do you expect him to live? But no, this is how life continues. Even if you're performing your duty, it may hurt someone somewhere. It may. Well, we do not know of any corrective steps that Valmiki took for what he had uttered. The story moves in a different direction. But Valmiki says, he told one of his disciples, not only Bharadwaj, but someone else, that what I said is poetry. It has 4 quarters, and each quarter has 8 letters, syllables. Now it is known as Anushtup Chanda, Shloka. Now, what is interesting about it, as we mentioned, that in the Vedas also we come across that meter, Anushtup Chanda. It's a name where you have four quarters with eight syllables. Whole of Gita, nearly whole of Gita is in that meter. And Valmiki Ramayana is composed that way. Mahabharata said this is a very popular concept. And when Tulsidas composed his Ramcharitmanas, he took it one step further, and his was not really syllable, it was in a calculated slightly differently. But that also had 8888. So it says, what I said should be treated as shlok. That's how we have named the series Shok to Shlok. Shok is sorrow to Shlok. Shlok is considered to be auspicious, something that increases your fame. So there is no mention of what happened with the Nisad. So there was Bharadwaj. He said, yes, yes, yes. This should be known as Shlok. So there's a difference between what we get in the Vedas. The mantras of the Vedas are known as mantras, not as Shlok. Very often people say Vedic Shlok. No, Ved do not have Shlok. Shlok is when poetry is in works other than the Vedas. So in Gita it's Shlok, Puranas it's Shlok, Mahabharata, Ramayana, everything else is Shlok. Even the works of Kalidas, these are all Shlok, but not the Vedas. They are either known uniformly as mantras, sometimes have simply as Rik, or they have special name for each of the Vedas. Bharadwaj also said that. So soon the topic changed, but Valmiki stayed engrossed with the idea of shlok. It was a massive instrument that he had got. And just before that, he had the story of Sri Rama. So you have two things. You have a story, and you also get the language. Those of you might have read Kratu there. We have mentioned about language. Every person's language is unique. Like some people think in numbers, some people think in equations, some people think in colors, some people think in meters, some people think in prose. Prose also has a meter of itself. Ultimately, language is rhythm. We all have our rhythm. Each one of us has a rhythm. We just need to find out what our rhythm is. That's one huge purpose of life. Now, persons like Kalidas and Shakespeare, they were lucky. They were lucky that they found out their language pretty early. So they could express what they knew in that language. You know, when Einstein was working on his works on relativity, he was stuck up with mathematical things because it needed a different language. So he consulted one of his friends and he gave that mathematical tool. In physics, very often it happens that it requires a language of mathematics, certain types. So in mathematics, you have different kinds of languages. You have algebra, you have geometry, you have topology, you have complex numbers, you have matrix. These are all different languages. Collectively, they may be called mathematics, but they are all different languages. We all have our own language, and we need to find that out. It may take thousands of births. Ultimately, the language has to come. And that's when the fulfillment in life comes. Not till then. So this continued. And then Brahma, the Lord of creation or the God of creation, he appeared and said, "Look, what you heard from Narada and what came out of your mouth, use one for the other." That means take Sri Rama's story forward on the vehicle of this meter and similarly use this meter to carry that. And go exactly the way Narada has told you. And then verse number 36. Actually, in Ramayana, the story moves very fast. Yavat sthasyanti greya saritascha mahitale. Till rivers and mountains are on this earth. Rivers may change their course. Mountains may shake. Nevertheless, there will be rivers, there will be mountains. Tavat Ramayana katha lokesu pracharishyati. Ramayana katha lokesu pracharishyati. Till the rivers are there. That means till this earth is there, till humanity is there. Story of Ramayana will continue to be narrated. It will continue to spread. It literally came out true. I mean, whosoever has composed these words, whoever gave us this verse, maybe it was an aspirational thought for him. It has come out literally true. Adaptations, translations, rendering, etc. Unbelievable. And as you will see, the work is so grand, work is so exalted. Human emotions have been portrayed so well. Personalities have been portrayed so well. Conflict situations have been portrayed so well. And through all this, the story moves forward. Through all this, Sri Rama's personality shines so brilliantly ever. So well, most of these verses clearly carry the imprint of composition by someone else who was an admirer of Valmiki or a disciple of his. And then it says, in brief, Ramayana is narrated here, barely in a few verses. That is, roughly you can say 25 verses. Just in 25 verses, entire Ramayana has been narrated in chapter 3. It's amazing that this used work of roughly 24,000 or you can say 18,000 verses if you exclude that seventh interpolation. Just in 25 verses, whole of Ramayana has been narrated as the great skills that these people had. Says, Chaturvingshat Sahasrani Shlokanam Uktavan Rishihi. It very clearly says the sage narrated this Ramayana in 24,000 verses in 7 sections, 7 kanda. But no, 7th kanda is clearly not his. And then it's narrated that Ramayana expands the scope of the Vedas. That means the Vedas, the idea, what the Vedas want to convey, become much more clear as you study Ramayana. Actually, if you want to understand the Vedas, the Upanishads and the Vedanta, first you need to understand and grasp Ramayana and Mahabharata. There is a very famous saying, particularly in the South India, where the study of the Vedas and the Vedanta, that is Upanishads, is extremely condemned unless a person has studied Ramayana and Mahabharata. Ramayana and Mahabharata give you the foundation for this great work. In Mahabharata, we come across a beautiful shloka where it says that unless a person has studied Itihasa and Purana, that means Ramayana, Mahabharata, and the Puranas, the Vedas are scared of such persons, believing that this person will harm me. So, whenever you come across somebody preaching Ved and Vedanta, and if he doesn't know Ramayana and Mahabharata, know that somewhere he will make mistake, somewhere. And people who go straight for Vedanta without knowing in depth the story of Ramayana and Mahabharata, the important thing is in depth. For every Indian knows the story of Ramayana and Mahabharata, but those stories come to us through comic books, through teleserials, etc. No, no, not that way. You should know the original Ramayana, you should know the original Mahabharata. That gives you a picture of what human life is exactly about, what you need to hold on to, and what you need to give up. It is through this cleansing process that you become fit for Ved and Vedanta. Now, this said, where Brahma blesses, this is a famous, this love, this Ramayan Katha Pracharishyati. Sorry. It says that when Valmiki composed this Ramayan Katha, it also came to be known as Paulastyaval and Dashananvad. Paulastya, grandson of Pulastya sage. Pulastya was a great sage. He was one of the seven sages, Saptarshi. Dashanan, another name of Ravana, because he had 10 heads. So these were the popular names. And it says, it is composed in such a way that it can be sung very easily and it has all the rasas. Much later, when I think Bhavabhuti, I'm not very sure, when I'm not sure about his name, I think it was Bhavabhuti, he gave the characteristics of poetry. What should be the characteristics of poetry? And all the characteristics that he brings in are hugely borrowed from Ramayana. So there are different kind of rasa, and it is composed in such a way that it can be sung in various tunes. That's the greatness of this work. And then Valmiki taught this great work, this great Mahakabya. It's not really epic, although sometimes we use the word epic. I personally use sacred epic because people do not understand Itihas, etc. If you are listening, you should know the correct word, sacred epic. Now, as we proceed towards the end, we will know, those of you who do not know the story, Sri Ramchandra was married to Sita, but due to unforeseen circumstances, Sita had to be sent to the forest. And she was big with babies, not babies at that time. But Sri Ramchandra, feeling his responsibility towards his people of his kingdom, he had Sita sent. And then she went to the ashram of Valmiki, and there she gave birth to the twin Love and Kush. Both of them looked like the reflection of Sri Ram himself. And Valmiki taught the twin this work, Valmiki Ramayana. And later, there was a yajna, huge yajna being performed by Sri Ramchandra. Love and Kush went around singing in Ayodhya. Neither Love Kush knew that Sri Ram is his father, nor Sri Rama knew that they are his sons. Phenomenal work. When the story reached the ears of Sri Rama, he had these two kids brought. They were young at that time. And immediately people realized that they have to be children of Sri Rama. So once they had narrated the story, Sri Ramchandra asked about them. Valmiki came, then he told the assembly about Mother Sita. That we will see later. So Lava and Kush learned, in the beginning itself it's there. And Lava and Kush went around the streets of Ayodhya singing on their veena, their musical instrument. The story of Sri Ram. There is such a huge pathos about it. Just imagine the two princes who are the sons of Sri Rama, who own the kingdom of Ayodhya, singing in the streets with his father sitting on the throne, sorry. And these boys, like hermit boys, with those long hairs tied on their head, singing the glory of Sri Rama, not knowing that he is their own father. Pathos is at its extreme in this story, just at extreme. Valmiki knew all along, Sita ji knew all along, and yet the kids did not know. What a story, what a story. We will be seeing more of it as we proceed. And there's this fifth chapter where Love and Kush start singing Ramayana. So this is also not part of what Valmiki composed actually. This is the narration part by someone. But soon the story will enter. And it says, Love and Kush are singing. It's, initially they were singing in the streets. Then they were brought to the news. When the news came, Sri Rama wanted to hear. And these two kids began. How, when creation took place, the Manu was the first king, and from there came the clan of the Ikshwaku. He says that in this epic poem, epic is poetry, but epic poem, sacred epic, we'll narrate dharma kamartha sahitam shotyabhyam anasuyata. Now, this is a very interesting thing here in this. This is verse number 4. This is a very, very, very interesting thing, particularly those of you who have an intellectual inclination. Ramayana itself says dharma artha kama sahitam. Now, Gita Press, while translating, see, I trust Gita Press. I have the highest respect for them, and I trust them like anything. And between Ramakrishna Mission Publications and Gita Press, I always trust and depend more on Gita press books. But at some places, they make some changes in translations. Somewhere, doesn't seem intellectually very honest. The book itself says three, dharma, artha, kama. In translation, moksha is added. Now that's not permitted. Because Valmiki Ramayana doesn't talk about moksha. Now let me explain. Indian society talks about four purushartha, four aims of life, four purposes of life. Like you must have been asked since your childhood, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want from life? What do you want to be in life, etc.? Our sages had very clearly given us four ideals. And these four ideals were about freedom. Freedom at four stages. Freedom from the physical wants, that is bodily wants, comes from artha, that is money. The money that you earn rightfully, righteously. Second is calm. Our emotional freedom comes when we get into certain enjoyments. And your rebirth may be in some inauspicious species. To be free from that, you need dharma. So, earth, calm, and dharma. Valmiki Ramayana focuses on these three: earth, calm, and dharma. Moksha is when you get freedom completely from the cycle of birth and death. Now, Valmiki Ramayana is essentially about dharma, earth, calm. However, it has inspired a huge number of books which are about moksha. It began with a book called Ananda Ramayana. Later, it was taken by Adhyatma Ramayana. And then Tulsidas ji in his Ramcharitmanas immortalized the concept of bhakti and gyan leading to moksha as the central theme of Ramakatha. Anyway, he says, on the banks of Saryu River, you can check on the map, there is this city, Ayodhya, ruled by King Dasharatha, who rules over the whole world. So this was a very old tradition where whenever a king performed huge sacrifice, huge yajna, the noble deeds of the king along with his ancestors were narrated. This tradition you find in the Vedas too. This continues. This continued for a very long time. Now, of course, we don't have kings and all, so this tradition has stopped. So the story from this point onward, where we have King Dashratha getting older, having no children. And now the story rolls. The rest of it we will have in the next talk. Thank you. Hope